Power of Awareness by Neville Goddard, and this is Chapter 7, Attitude. Experiments recently conducted by the Merle Lawrence and Albert Adams Dermuth in the latter psychologically laboratory in Hanover, New Hampshire, prove that when you look at something depends not so much on what is there as on the assumption you make when you look. Since what we believe to be real, physical world is actually only an assumptive world. It is not surprising that these experiments prove that what appears to be solidly real is actually the result of expectations or assumptions. Your assumptions determine not only what you see, but also what you do, for they govern all your conscious and subconscious movement towards the fulfillment of themselves. Over a century ago, this truth was stated by Emerson as follows: as the world was plastic and fluid in the hand of God, so it ever to so much of his attributes as we bring to it. To ignorance and sin it is flint. They adapt themselves to it as they may, but in proportion as a man has anything in the divine, the firmament flows before him and takes his signet and form. Your assumption is the hand of God, molding the firmament into the image of that which you assume. The assumption of the wish fulfilled is the high tide which lifts you easily off the bar of the senses where you have long lain strand. It lifts the mind into the prophecy, into the full right sense of the word. And if you have that controlled imagination, absorbed attention, which it is possible to attain, you must be sure that all your assumptions imply all your assumptions imply will come to pass. What seems to be is to those whom it seems to be. He was only repeating the eternal truth. There is nothing unclean of itself, but to him that esteemeth anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. Romans 14:4. Because there is nothing unclean of itself or clean of itself, you should assume the best and think only that which is lovely and of good rapport. It is not a superior insight, but ignorance of this law of assumption. If you read into the greatness of men some littleness with which you may be familiar, or into some situation or circumstance an unfavorable conviction, your particular relationship to another influences your assumption with respect to that other and makes you see him that which you do not see, makes you see in him that which you do see. If you can change your opinion of another, then you now believe of him cannot be absolutely true, but it is only relatively true. The following is an actual case history illustrating how the law of assumption works. One day, a costume designer described to me her difficulties in working with a prominent theatrical producer. She was convinced that he unjustly criticized and rejected her best work, and that often he was deliberately rude and unfair to her. Upon hearing her story, I explained that if she found the other rude and unfair, it was a sure sign that she herself was wanting, and that it was not the producer but herself that was in need of a new attitude. I told her that the power of this law of assumption is practical application could be discovered only through experience, and that only by assuming that the situation was already what she wanted it to be, could she prove that she could bring about the change desired. Her employer was merely bearing witness, telling her by his behavior what her concept of him was. I suggested that it was quite probable that she was carrying on conversations with him in her mind which were filled with criticism and recriminations. There was no doubt but that she was mentally arguing with the producer, for others only echo that which we whisper to them in secret. I asked her if it was not true that she talked to him mentally, and if so, what those conversations were like. She confessed that every morning on her way to the theater she told him just what she thought of him in a way that she would never dare to address him in person. The intensity and force of her mental arguments with him automatically established his behavior towards her. This is really powerful. She began to realize that all of us carry on mental conversations, but unfortunately, on most of those occasions, these conversations are argumentative. We have only to observe the passerby on the street to prove this assertion that so many people are mentally engrossed in conversation, and few appear to be happy about it. But the very intensity of their feeling must lead them quickly to the unpleasant incident they themselves have mentally created and therefore must now encounter. Wow. When she realized what she had been doing, she agreed to change her attitude and to live this law faithfully by assuming that her job was highly satisfactory and her relationship with her producer was a very happy one. To do this, she agreed that before going to sleep at night, on her way to work, and other intervals throughout the day, she would imagine that was congratulating her on her fine designs, and that she in turn had thanked him for his praise and kindness. To her great delight, she soon discovered for herself that her own attitude was the cause that all befell her. The behavior of her employer miraculously reversed itself, his attitude echoing, as it always has done, that which she assumed, now reflect her changed concept of him. What she did was by the power of her imagination. Her persistent assumption influenced his behavior and determined his attitude towards her. With the passport of desire on the wings of a controlled imagination, she traveled into the future of her own predetermined experience. Thus, we see it is not facts, but that which we create in our imagination which shapes our lives. For most of the conflicts of the day are due to the want of a little imagination to cast the beam out of our own eyes. It is the exact literal minded who live in a fictitious world. As this designer, by her controlled imagination, started the subtle change in her employee's mind, so can we, by the control of our own imagination and wisely directed feeling, solve our problems. By the intensity of her imagination and feeling, the designer cast a kind of enchantment on her producer's mind and caused him to think that his generous praise originated with him. Often, our most elaborate and original thoughts are determined by another. And here's another poem. We should never be certain that it was not some woman treading in the wine press who began that subtle change in a man's mind, or that the passion did not begin in the mind of some shepherd boy, lighting up his eyes for a moment before it ran upon its way. William Butler Yeats. I think the last part of this chapter is one of the most powerful ones. Attitude. Um, the attitude that you take towards someone else. I have personally experienced this exact situation with an employer that I thought was too harsh. And I began to change that internal conversation and stop overly criticizing this person. And the entire business relationship changed. I had this happen with an in home private chef client that I've had now for over a year and a half, who is actually one of my closest friends. And there was some misunderstandings in the beginning of the relationship, and some cancellation of appointments, and I really began to see her in a negative light, and I started complaining about her, and the relationship started to get worse and worse. And then I had a conversation with my brother about it, and he was like, so frank, he's like, well, is she paying you? If she's paying you, just go there and make the money and let her freaking pay you your rate. And I began to just like not even worry about it. And I used to criticize her all the time just because I found her to be, how shall we say, less than positive, and that was just like rubbing me the wrong way. But my brother helped me see that it really wasn't about what her attitude was. And so the moment I dropped it and started appreciating the fact that, hey, I have a paying client that's paying me, top rate, and I'm seeing this client twice a month, twice a week, and so it was a profitable client. And at that point, my attention shifted to the benefits of the relationship, and all of her negative tendencies, they faded away. Literally, I gave no attention to any of it. And now when something comes up, I just like, oh gosh, I just chalk it up as like, oh, it's just how she is sometimes. Who cares? Doesn't really matter. And our relationship has strengthened. We became good friends. We've had personal dinner parties. We exchanged gifts during the holiday. And this was a client that I remember I just didn't even want to work for because I just found her to be negative. And really, once I shifted my attention on the positive aspects of this relationship, it blossomed. It literally did. So, our attention, where we direct our conversations, and if you find that you're having conversations, negative conversations about other people, you're that they're going to be reflected in those relationships. So even if something is negative, even if what you're seeing is not what you want, if you just start having a conversation from the state of the wish fulfilled, or from the premise of that relationship is the way that you want it to be, and that could be with money, that could be with your lover, with your employers, your kids, and just start seeing it rather than focusing on the problem, focusing all of your attention and having mental conversations is such a powerful way to manifest. I use the inner conversation technique all the time. All the time when things aren't the way that I want, I will just start having conversations. And sometimes it sounds silly because it's like the exact opposite, but I'll just be like, I love that I got an extra month rent free because the construction was delayed. I love that my landlord is giving us an extra month free. I'm so freaking thankful. I'm so happy that that worked out perfectly. I'm so happy and thankful that I literally got an extra month free. When as it relates to my kids, sometimes being a parent, they don't want to get up for school. They're teenagers, but they're still, you still got to follow up with them. And so I love that everyone has a great morning routine. And this is literally in the midst of things falling apart. So come back to your inner conversations, come back to your affirmations. If you want to know how to apply Neville's teachings, a lot of people listen to videos, read the books, but it's like, okay, you just have information. This is how you apply it to change anything in your life. We're always having an inner conversation with ourselves about our lives. We're always having inner conversations with ourselves and other people, and there is a connection. And so when you change the narrative, when you change the story and continuously change it to the way that you want it and drop the old story, that's when you start to see things change. Sometimes it happens instantly. I've had it happen in the middle of teaching classes where it wasn't turning out the way I want, and I instantly just started changing conversation in my head, and the dynamic of the room changed. I've seen it take a few days. I've had people call me and text me after having inner conversations with them, and me telling them in my inner conversation that they're calling me right now. I've had that happen within like 30 minutes. So we are powerful creators. My name's Koren. I hope you enjoyed this video, this reading. We're reading the whole book one chapter at a time, so you can just chunk it down into bite-sized pieces. If you would like for me to help you with your manifestation, I have a great package, whether it's bringing back that specific person or manifesting career success, large sums of money success. Those are things that have worked out really well for me in my life. So, love you so much for watching. Make sure you leave me a comment below, and I will see you on the next video.